Welcome to Silver Narratives. Today, we invite you to step into a story that stretches across centuries, an extraordinary journey shaped not by swords, crowns, or empires, but by the relentless power of ideas. This is the story of a man who never fought a single battle, yet trained the young warrior who would go on to conquer the world. A man who never claimed a kingdom, never sat upon a throne, and never commanded armies, yet his influence ruled over the minds of kings, emperors, generals, scientists, poets, and thinkers for more than 2,000 years. He did not create weapons of war or build towers of stone, but he constructed something far more enduring, the very blueprint of human thought. He designed the tools that allow us to question, reason, analyze, and understand the world around us. And his impact is so powerful that even today, whether we realize it or not, we still think using the methods he created. This is the emotional, inspiring, and life-changing story of Aristotle, the philosopher who shaped Alexander the Great, the teacher whose words traveled farther than any army, and the mind that gave birth to the foundations of logic, science, ethics, biology, politics, education, psychology, leadership, and the very structure of human knowledge. Aristotle is not simply a figure from ancient history, he is the silent architect behind much of modern civilization. If you are someone who ever felt misunderstood because your ideas were different, someone who dreams of learning English through stories that carry real meaning and emotion, or someone who wishes to influence the world not with force, anger, or power but with words, wisdom, and truth, then this story belongs to you. This journey will show you that greatness does not always begin with noise. Sometimes it begins with a question whispered in curiosity. If you've ever felt like your voice is small or unnoticed, Aristotle's life will show you how one thoughtful mind can shape the future of the entire world. What you're about to experience is not just another biography or historical summary. This is a deep journey into pain, passion, struggle, discovery, and purpose. You will walk with a young boy from a small town in northern Greece, a boy who lost his parents early, a boy who found comfort not in wealth or power but in questions about life, nature, people, emotions, stars, animals, and the mysteries of the world. You'll watch him grow into a thinker who challenged old beliefs, studied everything from seashells to politics, and developed a way of learning that became the backbone of Western thought for centuries. And while you follow his path, this video will also guide your own growth. You will improve your English listening skills through clear and powerful storytelling. You will learn new vocabulary, experience history in a way that feels alive, and discover ideas that might change how you see the world, and yourself. Most importantly, you'll witness how one person, armed with nothing but curiosity and a hunger for knowledge, reshaped human civilization, and how you, too, can create change that lasts far beyond your lifetime. If you're ready, then let us begin the journey into the mind of Aristotle, the man who taught kings, shaped nations, and changed the world forever without ever lifting a sword. So sit back, focus, and listen with your heart, because what you're about to hear is not just a story, it is the beginning of a revolution in the way human beings understand the world. This is the story of the man who taught humanity how to think. Part 1, The Curious Boy from Greece, How It All Began. Let me take you far back in time, not a century or even 5 centuries, but more than 2,400 years into the past. Picture a world of marble temples, open markets, philosophers debating under the sun, and kingdoms rising and falling. In this ancient world, in a small town called Stagira in northern Greece, a child was born in the year 384 BC, a child destined to shape the mind of civilization itself. His name was Aristotle. Aristotle's father, Nicomachus, was no ordinary man. He was a physician, not to a village, not to a small community, but to the king of Macedonia himself. This meant that Aristotle grew up not around toys or simple stories, but in an environment filled with scholars, healers, and people who carried immense knowledge and responsibility. From the very beginning, he saw how his father healed people using observation, diagnosis, and logical reasoning. Young Aristotle watched silently as his father examined patients, studied symptoms, and searched for answers hidden beneath the surface of the human body. These moments didn't just influence him, they shaped the very foundation of his mind. While other children played with stones and wooden toys, Aristotle played with questions. He was not interested in running games or childhood competitions. His curiosity was different, deeper, sharper, almost urgent. Even as a small child, he would stare at birds slicing through the sky, at the patterns on leaves, at the movement of clouds, and at the faces of people around him. His mind silently asked, "Why does a bird fly? Why does the sun rise every single day? What makes humans happy? What is truth? What is the purpose of life?" These were not the random thoughts of a child. These were the early sparks of one of the greatest minds to ever walk the earth. But Aristotle's early life was not filled only with wonder. It was marked by tragedy, deep, life-changing tragedy. When he was still very young, too young to understand the meaning of loss, both his mother and father passed away. History doesn't tell us exactly how or why, but we know this much: Aristotle became an orphan before he could even understand what it meant to be alone. The pain of that loss stayed with him forever. Yet, instead of closing his heart or turning bitter, something extraordinary happened. That grief turned into curiosity about life itself. He did not ask, "Why did this happen to me?" but instead, "What is life? What is death? Why does anything exist at all?" His relatives raised him with care, but they quickly realized that Aristotle needed more than a home, he needed a place where minds sharpened minds. So, as he grew into a teenager, he was sent to Athens, the shining center of art, philosophy, debate, and learning. Athens was the beating intellectual heart of the ancient world, and it was there that Aristotle's real journey would begin. At just 17 years old, filled with questions and carrying the quiet pain of losing his parents, Aristotle walked through the gates of a place that would completely transform his destiny. Plato's Academy, the most legendary school of philosophy ever created. And in that moment, the student who would someday teach kings stepped into the world that would shape his genius forever. The Academy was not just a school, it was the first real university in human history, a place where knowledge was treated like treasure and questions were more valuable than gold. At the very center of this extraordinary institution stood a man whose name already echoed across Greece and beyond, Plato. He was the greatest philosopher of his time, the brilliant thinker who had studied directly under Socrates, the man who chose death rather than abandon the truth. Plato wasn't just a teacher, he was a legend, a living bridge between two eras of wisdom. Now imagine this: you are a 17-year-old orphan, carrying the weight of losing your parents, stepping into a place filled with the most brilliant minds of the ancient world. And you discover that your teacher, the person who will shape your mind, is someone who learned from Socrates himself, the father of Western philosophy. For young Aristotle, this was not just good fortune, it was heaven on earth. For the next 20 years, Aristotle lived, learned, debated, and grew inside the academy. And he didn't remain just another student. He quickly became the brightest mind Plato had ever taught, a prodigy whose hunger for knowledge seemed endless. But even though Aristotle loved Plato deeply, respected him profoundly, and considered him a second father, their minds did not walk the same path forever. Plato believed in ideal forms, the idea that everything in our physical world is just a shadow, an imperfect copy of a perfect version that exists somewhere in a higher, invisible realm. According to Plato, the world we see is not the real world, it is only an echo. But Aristotle? He saw the world differently. He believed in what we can touch, see, measure, observe, and test. Plato said, there is a perfect form of a tree in another realm. Aristotle said, let's study this tree right here, the roots, the branches, the leaves, the life inside it. And that single difference changed everything. Aristotle began writing about anything and everything he could observe. Animals, plants, politics, human emotions, weather, biology, logic, the stars, storytelling, dreams, the soul, happiness, justice, every corner of existence. He wasn't trying to win arguments like other philosophers. He wasn't trying to impress Plato. He was trying to understand reality itself. Imagine this man writing thousands of pages by hand, no electricity, no books, no laboratories, no computers, no internet. Just a scroll, ink, his curiosity, and one of the greatest brains in history. Slowly, Aristotle transformed from a student into a force of knowledge that the world had never seen before. But life is rarely perfect, even for geniuses. When Plato died, everyone expected Aristotle, the Academy's brightest star, to inherit the institution and lead it into a new age of learning. Many believed he deserved it. Many believed he was the chosen one. But that's not what happened. Aristotle's ideas were too bold, too scientific, too rebellious. He questioned too much. He challenged some of Plato's teachings rather than repeating them. To the conservative members of the Academy, Aristotle was brilliant, but too different. And so, after 20 years of loyalty, passion, dedication, and extraordinary brilliance, the unthinkable happened. Aristotle was not chosen to lead the Academy. It was a silent betrayal. A deep wound. A heartbreak that cut through his soul. For the first time in his life, the greatest mind of the ancient world felt truly rejected. He had lost his second home. The Academy, the place that had shaped him, challenged him, and protected him for 20 long years, was no longer his. And so, just as he had once walked away from his parents' home after losing them too soon, Aristotle again found himself leaving something he loved deeply. But this time, instead of letting heartbreak swallow him, he turned it into fuel. The world had pushed him out, but his spirit refused to be broken. The doors of Plato's Academy, doors he had walked through thousands of times, closed behind him forever. He had given them his youth, his passion, his loyalty, and his brilliance. He had studied harder than anyone, questioned more deeply than anyone, and expanded the very boundaries of knowledge. But in the end, even all of that wasn't enough to earn him the leadership of the institution he had devoted half his life to. When Plato died, the Academy needed a new guide. A new mind to shape the next generation. And even though Aristotle was the brightest scholar the Academy had ever produced, he was not chosen. Why? Because he had grown beyond the mold they wanted to preserve. He was not a mirror of Plato, he was an evolution. He didn't repeat the teachings, he challenged them. He didn't worship ideal worlds, he questioned the one he lived in. His mind was too original, too scientific, too independent. And for that, he was gently, quietly, but unmistakably pushed aside. And now, at the age of 37, Aristotle stood at a crossroads. He had no home, no position, no city to call his own, no institution to belong to. The most brilliant thinker in Greece was suddenly a philosopher with nowhere to go. But what he did still have, what no one could take from him, was his mind, a mind burning with fire, curiosity, and unshakable purpose. Aristotle did not fall into despair. He did not complain, blame anyone, or attack the academy for rejecting him. He didn't seek revenge, power, or sympathy. Instead, he did what true thinkers do, he turned toward the unknown. He believed that if one institution could not recognize his voice, then the world would. And so he left Athens behind, not with anger, but with determination. He began a journey across lands, mountains, seas, and kingdoms, not looking for comfort, but for truth. He believed the world was a vast library, and every city, every creature, every plant, every face held a lesson. And Aristotle would collect them all, turning the world itself into his new academy. His first destination was Assos, a beautiful city by the sea in Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey. This was no ordinary stop. Assos was ruled by Hermias, a wise and generous leader who had once been a student of Plato himself. Hermias valued philosophy, curiosity, and wisdom, and he welcomed thinkers like family. When Aristotle arrived, Hermias immediately recognized his genius. He offered Aristotle not just shelter and safety, but something far more precious. Freedom, freedom to think, to teach, to write, to explore. For the first time since leaving Athens, Aristotle felt seen again. Not as a shadow of Plato, not as a controversial voice, but as a mind destined to push humanity forward. Here in Assos, under open skies and by the endless sea, Aristotle would begin to rebuild his life, his purpose, and his vision, one idea at a time. In Assos, Aristotle's life had begun to bloom in ways he had never imagined. The open sky became his classroom, the soft breeze his chalkboard, and the world around him a living textbook. He didn't confine himself to abstract theories or debates alone. Instead, he asked his students to observe the world with all their senses, look closely, touch carefully, measure diligently, and never stop wondering. Every rock, every leaf, every bird was a lesson, every question, no matter how small, was a doorway to knowledge. Here, Aristotle's teaching became something revolutionary, learning through life itself, not just through words written on a scroll. But life, as always, has a way of surprising even the wisest. Amidst the rhythm of teaching, Aristotle's heart stirred in ways he hadn't anticipated. He met Pythias, the adopted daughter of Hermias, a young woman as intelligent and curious as he was. She asked questions, challenged ideas, and shared his endless appetite for understanding. Their connection was instantaneous, profound, and deeply human. The philosopher who dissected the stars and the soul now found himself exploring the mysteries of love. They married, and soon welcomed a daughter, also named Pythias, into the world. Aristotle, the man of reason and logic, had become a husband and father, and the experience changed him in subtle but powerful ways. His writings expanded beyond pure philosophy into questions of ethics, family, and the balance between love and reason. He began to ask, what is the good life? What makes a human life complete? His mind was as vibrant as ever, but now his heart had a pulse, and his thinking became richer, warmer, more human. He understood that wisdom alone could not sustain the soul. Happiness, love, and connection were equally necessary. Yet, happiness, as Aristotle would learn, is rarely safe for long. The Persian Empire, ever watchful and wary of Greek influence, perceived Hermias, a ruler who supported philosophy and sheltered thinkers, as a threat. In a cruel twist of fate, Hermias was captured, tortured, and executed. Aristotle was devastated. His friend, mentor, and protector was gone. The world had shown him its harshest truth: even wisdom cannot shield you from the cruelty of power. He grieved deeply, but instead of succumbing to despair, he honored Hermias by writing a hymn, celebrating his life, his generosity, and his vision. He vowed to carry Hermias's memory forward, letting it guide his steps in the uncertain journey ahead. After this painful loss, Aristotle moved once more, this time to Mytilene, a coastal city on the island of Lesbos. He was older now, carrying the weight of loss, experience, and reflection. He was quieter in some ways, more deliberate, but inside, his mind burned with the same unquenchable fire. Surrounded by the endless sea, he found himself drawn to life in all its forms, not just human life, but the life of every creature. He studied the fish in the water, the birds in the sky, the insects on the ground, and the mammals that roamed the forests. He observed how they moved, how they reproduced, how they survived, and ultimately, how they died. Aristotle's notebooks began to overflow with meticulous observations. He recorded details that no one else had noticed before: the habits of bees, the migrations of birds, the growth of plants, the patterns of reproduction, and even the instincts of animals. He was creating a map of life itself, a foundation of biology, ecology, and natural science, long before these words even existed. And through it all, he never stopped asking questions: why does this happen? How does it work? What does it teach us about life, about humans, about the universe? In Lesbos, Aristotle was more than a philosopher. He was a naturalist, a teacher, an observer, and a thinker seeking truth in every corner of the world. And little did he know, his restless journey was preparing him for the most extraordinary chapter of his life, the chapter that would bring him face to face with a young boy who would grow to become Alexander the Great, the man who would conquer the known world. For Aristotle, this meeting would not be just another encounter, it would be the moment where his lifetime of study, observation, and wisdom would ripple across history. Aristotle's studies in Lesbos had opened a new world of discovery. He did not merely think about nature, he immersed himself in it. He dissected animals, observed their behavior with painstaking attention, sketched what he saw, and filled endless scrolls with notes. Every movement, every habit, every detail was recorded. This was the birth of biology, not just as a set of ideas, but as a rigorous method of observation, comparison, and classification. He discovered patterns in life that no one had ever noticed before. Dolphins breathe air, octopuses can change the color of their skin, chicks develop inside eggs, some fish lay thousands of eggs while others give live birth. He began to understand life's endless variety and its underlying order. While the rest of the world worshipped gods and myths, Aristotle worshipped reality itself. The universe, in its complexity and simplicity, was his temple. With his keen mind and patient eyes, he was building the first systematic approach to scientific knowledge the world had ever seen. Meanwhile, far to the north in Macedonia, a powerful king named Philip II was thinking about Aristotle. Philip was no ordinary ruler. He wanted his son, Alexander, to be more than a conqueror. He wanted him to be wise, to understand the world, to lead with knowledge as well as courage. Alexander was wild, brilliant, and full of fire, a boy who could conquer kingdoms, but only with the right guidance could he shape them wisely. Philip remembered Aristotle, whose father had once served as the royal physician, and who was now recognized across Greece as the greatest living mind. He sent a personal invitation, "Come to Macedonia. Teach my son. I will give you everything you need." Aristotle accepted. He understood that this was more than a teaching job, it was a chance to shape a mind that might one day change the course of history. Philip arranged a special school in a quiet place called Mysia, surrounded by nature, trees, gardens, flowers, and the soft hum of life. It was not a palace filled with grandeur, nor a battlefield filled with blood, but a garden of thought, a sanctuary for ideas to grow. Here, Aristotle taught Alexander and a group of young Macedonian nobles who would one day rule alongside him. But he didn't teach in the traditional way. He did not simply lecture. He asked questions, challenged assumptions, and encouraged debate. He guided them to see patterns, to think critically, to question deeply, and to observe carefully. He taught them logic, philosophy, politics, ethics, literature, history, geography, medicine, rhetoric, and strategy. But above all, he taught them how to think. How to weigh evidence, how to reason, how to understand both the world and themselves. In that garden, under the open sky, surrounded by the songs of birds and the whispers of trees, a young Alexander learned more than knowledge, he learned wisdom, and Aristotle became not just his teacher, but his mentor, his guide, and, in many ways, the force that would shape the mind behind one of history's greatest empires. Among the many lessons Aristotle gave to Alexander, one stands out above all. He gifted the young prince a special copy of Homer's Iliad, the epic tale of the Trojan War. But this was no ordinary copy, it was filled with Aristotle's handwritten notes in the margins, filled with observations, strategies, and reflections on heroism, leadership, and ethics. That book would become Alexander's constant companion, his guide, and, in many ways, his Bible during his military campaigns. Alexander was not an easy student. He was bold, ambitious, restless, and sometimes reckless. But he respected Aristotle. And Aristotle respected his fire, shaping it with guidance. He taught Alexander that a great king must not only conquer lands but understand them, their people, and the moral responsibilities of leadership. This was no ordinary mentorship, it was one of the most important in human history, a union of fire and wisdom that would change the world. While Aristotle guided Alexander in the quiet garden of Mysia, something extraordinary was happening in the background. His ideas, his notebooks, and his teachings were spreading like wildfire. Scroll by scroll, lesson by lesson, Aristotle's thoughts evolved, expanded, and multiplied. He was no longer merely a philosopher pondering abstract questions. He was becoming a force of nature, shaping minds, societies, and ultimately the future itself with every word, every lecture, and every carefully observed truth. And then, as all teachers must, he watched his student grow into a man. Alexander left the sheltered gardens of Mysia and began his legendary conquests, sweeping across lands, mountains, and seas, creating an empire that would stretch across continents. Aristotle, meanwhile, returned to Athens, older, wiser, and more famous than ever. The city that had once rejected him now welcomed him as a master of thought. He was no longer the overlooked student of Plato, he was the teacher of the most powerful man in the world, a living proof of how knowledge can shape destiny. Back in Athens, Aristotle opened his own school, the Lyceum, a place that was unlike any academy before it. Here, Aristotle walked alongside his students as he taught, speaking while moving, questioning while observing, blending theory and practice seamlessly. He taught everything from logic to literature, science to the soul, nature to nations, encouraging his students to explore, challenge, and discover. His students were called peripatetics, the walkers, because Aristotle believed that true learning came from motion, interaction, and inquiry. In the Lyceum, philosophy was alive. Aristotle didn't just teach, he created an intellectual movement, one that would influence generations for centuries. Ideas that started as questions under the open sky in Assos had now grown into a network of knowledge that shaped the foundation of science, ethics, politics, education, and leadership. Aristotle had come full circle, from the orphaned boy in Stagira, to the rejected student at Plato's academy, to the teacher of kings, and finally to the founder of a school that would change the world. And yet, even at the peak of his influence, he never stopped asking questions. He never stopped observing. He never stopped seeking truth. In his lifetime, Aristotle had discovered that knowledge was not just power, it was immortality, a force that could shape minds, civilizations, and history itself. Aristotle's mind never rested. Every waking moment, he wrote. Scroll after scroll, idea after idea, he recorded politics, ethics, poetics, metaphysics, rhetoric, the soul, the history of animals, and hundreds of other works. But Aristotle was not writing merely to impress others or show his cleverness. No, he had a far greater goal, to capture all human knowledge in a single lifetime. He believed that everything in existence was connected. If one could understand a single thing deeply, one could, in principle, understand everything else. He created systems, definitions, and categories. He codified ways of thinking that had never existed before. Logic, he said, was the tool for truth. Ethics was the path to happiness. Politics was the art of living together. Poetry reflected human emotion. Biology, the study of life itself, was a way to understand the world around us. He believed in balance, purpose, observation, discipline, and relentless questioning. What is this thing? What is its purpose? What makes it excellent? From frogs to stars, from kings to plays, from human suffering to human joy, Aristotle studied it all. And now, back in Athens, he had built a school, gathered students from all over Greece, and created a place where ideas could grow freely. He had influence, respect, and a growing reputation that stretched far beyond the city's walls. But the world was changing fast. Thanks to Alexander's empire, Aristotle's influence extended far beyond his classroom. Part 2 of his life, Power, Politics, and the Price of Wisdom, was unfolding. In his 40s and 50s, Aristotle had become the most respected thinker alive. At the Lyceum, he wrote furiously, taught tirelessly, and mentored a generation of scholars and leaders who would carry his ideas across the Mediterranean. But his philosophy was no longer just theory, it had real power. For somewhere far from Athens, his former student, Alexander of Macedonia, was sweeping across the known world like a storm. By this time, Alexander had already defeated the mighty Persian Empire, conquered Egypt, crossed the heart of Asia, and become the ruler of the largest empire in history. And wherever he went, Greek ideas followed, ideas shaped in no small part by Aristotle. Alexander sent back plants, animals, maps, and cultural observations from the far reaches of his empire. He opened libraries, promoted education, and carried the Iliad annotated by Aristotle wherever he marched. Though Aristotle did not ride into battle or lead armies, make no mistake, his mind rode beside Alexander, shaping the empire from the shadows. The people of Athens understood this. Though Aristotle was not an Athenian by birth and had once been rejected by Plato's academy, his ideas now commanded respect. The city tolerated him because power no longer came solely from wealth or swords, it came from wisdom, from thought, from the ability to shape minds and empires alike. Aristotle had become proof that influence could take many forms, and that one person, armed with knowledge and curiosity, could leave a mark on the world far greater than armies ever could. In the Lyceum, Aristotle's work went far beyond ordinary lectures. He wasn't simply teaching, he was building a living, breathing machine of knowledge, a system designed to understand every aspect of human life and the natural world. He developed a structured approach to study ethics, politics, biology, psychology, astronomy, economics, drama, logic, education, memory, emotion, dreams, the philosophy of war, friendship, and, ultimately, the philosophy of everything. But Aristotle didn't see these subjects as separate silos. To him, everything was interconnected, a vast web of cause and effect, patterns, and principles. He trained his students not just to memorize, but to observe the real world, measure phenomena, analyze data, and question everything. They traveled across hundreds of city-states, gathering laws to compile the first ever encyclopedia of political science. They recorded details about animals, diseases, cities, rituals, and theater performances. Nothing was too small to escape Aristotle's attention, and everything was studied, labeled, and discussed with meticulous care. While Plato's philosophy was poetic, abstract, and mysterious, Aristotle's philosophy was sharp, precise, and practical, built for the real world. His writing lacked literary beauty, it was dry, technical, almost austere, but it was clear, structured, and honest, a blueprint of human knowledge. And that was precisely why it endured for over 2,000 years, influencing generations across continents. Yet, success breeds enemies, and Aristotle's growing influence did not sit well with everyone. Many Athenians had never forgotten that he was not born in their city, that he was a Macedonian by association, and that his former student, Alexander, was the ruler of a massive empire. To some, Aristotle was not a revered teacher or philosopher. He was a symbol of outside influence, a threat to Athenian pride and autonomy. As Alexander's power grew, so did the tension. The young king had conquered vast lands, executed his opponents, and even declared himself a god. Whispers began to circulate in Athens. Is Aristotle advising Alexander? Does he condone tyranny? Is he loyal to Athens or to the Macedonian Empire? None of it was true. Aristotle had no desire for power, no wish to govern, no ambition for fame beyond knowledge. He sought understanding, truth, and the betterment of human thought. But public opinion is rarely rational, and Athens, proud and suspicious, began to turn against him. The city that had once welcomed the philosopher as a teacher now regarded him as a dangerous influence. Slowly, subtly, the ground beneath Aristotle's feet began to crack. The walls that had protected him, the networks of students and scholars, the respect he had earned, all of it started to feel fragile in the face of envy, fear, and political tension. The man who had spent his life observing the world, measuring it, and seeking patterns now faced the one force he could not control, the unpredictable, irrational tides of human society. Aristotle had built an empire of ideas, but even the strongest ideas can be threatened when power and suspicion collide. And as the whispers grew louder, Aristotle knew that the next chapter of his life would test not just his intellect, but his very survival. Then came the news that would shake Aristotle's world to its very core. In 323 BC, Alexander the Great, the boy he had taught, the student who had become the most powerful man in the world, died suddenly in Babylon. He was only 32 years old. The cause remains a mystery to this day. Some say it was fever, others claim poisoning, and some whisper it was simply fate. But one truth was undeniable: the empire that Alexander had built in just 12 short years began to fragment overnight. Chaos spread like wildfire across the lands he had conquered. In Athens, the people celebrated. To them, it was the fall of a tyrant, a chance to reclaim their freedom. But the celebration didn't stop with Alexander. It extended to his ideas, his allies, and his teacher. The very city that had once executed Socrates for corrupting the youth now turned its suspicion and fury toward Aristotle. Accusations flew: impiety, disrespecting the gods, spreading dangerous ideas. Was he guilty? Absolutely not. Yet in ancient Athens, logic and reason were no shield. Powerful minds were always feared, and philosophers were always convenient scapegoats. The mob did not care for truth, only for symbols of influence and power. Aristotle saw the pattern clearly, the bitter lesson of history repeating itself. He recalled his own words: when democracy is ignorant, even wisdom becomes a crime. Instead of defending himself, he chose the path he had walked before: quiet, measured, and deliberate. He fled the city. He reportedly told his friends, "I will not allow Athens to sin twice against philosophy. The first sin was killing Socrates. The second would have been killing me." And so, he left. He returned to Chalcis, a city on the island of Euboea, where his mother had once lived. Aristotle was now in his 60s, older, frail, yet still a towering presence of thought and curiosity. He had no school, no students, no platform. What he did have were his books, his notes, and his mind, a universe that had never stopped spinning. His wife, Pythias, had died long ago. He lived now with her Pylus, a woman he loved deeply, and their son, Nicomachus, named in honor of Aristotle's own father. Even in exile, Aristotle could not stop thinking. His intellect remained relentless, as vivid and expansive as the day he first stepped into Plato's academy. He wrote tirelessly about aging, memory, the soul, the causes and purposes of things, and the final forms that give life its meaning. Even as his body weakened, his mind remained immortal. The man who had taught kings, mapped the natural world, and catalogued human knowledge continued to observe, question, and theorize. He had survived loss, rejection, exile, and political danger, and yet, he never ceased seeking truth, understanding, and the principles that underlie all existence. In Chalcis, Aristotle lived quietly, but his ideas were louder than ever. They would travel far beyond the shores of Greece, shaping science, philosophy, politics, education, and the very way humanity thinks for millennia to come. Though the empire he had indirectly helped to build was in chaos, and though he had no power, no city, and no audience, Aristotle had achieved something far greater. He had ensured that wisdom itself would endure, even if the world around him wavered and fell into disorder. In the quiet of Chalcis, Aristotle contemplated the universe as he had never done before. He called it the unmoved mover, the force behind all things, the eternal principle that set everything in motion without itself being moved. This was his quiet version of God, not a man with a beard, not a deity to pray to, but a perfect mind holding the cosmos together, timeless, unchanging, and beyond human comprehension. Far from the city that once celebrated him and then betrayed him, Aristotle lived in exile, carrying a heavy heart but an unstoppable mind. The streets of Athens no longer echoed his name. The shaded paths of the Lyceum were empty. No students gathered to hear his questions, no royal messengers brought news of distant kingdoms. No crowds, no noise, no applause. Yet, inside his home, inside his private world, something still burned. Because when you carry the universe inside your head, there is always something to give, even if the world has turned away. Each morning, Aristotle rose early. There were no servants bustling around him, no grand halls filled with scrolls, no courtly distractions. On a small wooden table sat stacks of parchment, pens carved from reeds, and jars of black ink. His hands trembled more than they had in his youth, and his body moved slower, but his mind remained sharp, alert, alive. He dipped his pen, and day after day, sentence after sentence, he wrote. His writing was deliberate, meticulous, a final gift to the world. In these years, Aristotle cared little for fame or recognition. His focus was on the first principles, the deepest and most fundamental questions of existence. He asked, why does anything exist at all? What causes something to exist? What is the purpose of everything that exists? Is there a meaning woven into the fabric of the universe? What is the soul? What is a human being? It was in this period of reflection and exile that he produced some of his most abstract and profound work, the Metaphysics. Here, he attempted to map the unseen, to understand the principles beyond the observable world, to explore the eternal truths that underlie life, matter, thought, and being itself. Each page was a testament to a mind that refused to rest, a mind that had once taught kings, catalogued nature, and systematized human knowledge, and now was daring to confront the ultimate questions. Even as his body weakened, Aristotle's intellect remained unstoppable, a universe contained in a single human mind. He had faced loss, exile, betrayal, and the chaos of history, yet he never stopped seeking, never stopped observing, never stopped questioning. In the quiet of his small home, surrounded by scrolls, ink, and the memories of a life lived fully, Aristotle continued to push the boundaries of human understanding, determined to ensure that the truth outlives him, long after he had walked from the world into eternity. In his final years, Aristotle continued to explore ideas that no one had ever dared to formalize before. He questioned the very nature of being, the structure of reality, and the existence of an unmoved mover, a force that set everything in motion without itself being moved. This was a divine intelligence, pure thought, eternal, and invisible, not like the gods of temples, but something far deeper, holding the cosmos together. Aristotle was not writing to please anyone. He wasn't trying to gain fame, impress kings, or satisfy scholars. He wrote because he needed to understand the invisible architecture of the universe, and he did it alone, in the quiet of his exile. Yet, even in solitude, he was not entirely alone. He lived with Herpylus, a loyal companion who had been with him since his years in Athens, and their young son Nicomachus, the child who carried not only Aristotle's blood but also the potential, hope, and continuity of his ideas. Aristotle loved his son deeply. He spoke gently to him, told stories, shared his thoughts, and taught with the same care and rigor he had given his students, but now with the warmth of a father speaking to his own child. It was during this period of quiet reflection and paternal devotion that Aristotle began work on one of his most enduring masterpieces, the Nicomachean Ethics. Not written just for Nicomachus, nor about him personally, the work carried Aristotle's heart. In the name of his son, he poured out wisdom for all humanity. He wrote about what it means to live a good life, why pleasure alone cannot be the ultimate goal, why virtue matters, and how real happiness emerges from balance, character, and purpose. Among his most famous words, "We are what we repeatedly do." Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. It was a manual for living a life of reason, morality, and fulfillment, composed by a man watching his own life slowly draw to a close. Seasons passed. Winters grew longer, summers shorter. Aristotle's legs grew weaker, his eyesight dimmed, and his hands trembled more than ever. Yet he continued to write, carefully and stubbornly, even when his fingers cramped. He whispered questions to himself, argued with ideas in his mind, and kept thinking until the very last days of his life. The man who had once taught kings, classified every animal he could observe, mapped the stars with nothing but logic, built schools, and shaped science and philosophy itself, now moved slowly through his garden. He would sit silently, watching the wind stir the trees, sometimes letting a tear escape, not from fear of death, but from a painful awareness of impermanence. He understood a harsh truth: everything he had written, everything he had built, could vanish. There were no printing presses, no digital archives, no libraries that could preserve his thoughts automatically. The words, the wisdom, and the knowledge he had devoted a lifetime to could disappear like leaves in the wind. Yet even in the face of this fragility, Aristotle continued to think, question, and teach in his own quiet way. His mind remained a universe unto itself, alive, eternal, and defiant against time, preparing to leave behind not gold, not monuments, but something far more enduring, the wisdom that would guide humanity for thousands of years to come. Every word Aristotle wrote rested on fragile scrolls, made of thin, dry material that could be destroyed by fire, water, or the passage of time. He had written hundreds of works, some claim over 200 treatises, covering everything from ethics to biology, logic to metaphysics. Yet he knew the fragility of his legacy. If even one generation failed to copy them, they could vanish completely from history. This fear haunted him quietly, a shadow over his final years. He didn't crave statues, temples, or praise. All he wanted was simple: let knowledge survive, even if he did not. As the end approached, Aristotle wrote a will. It was neither dramatic nor emotional, but simple, logical, and carefully considered. He requested that Herpylus be treated with honor and provided a home. That Nicomachus receive the best possible education and care. That his servants be freed and treated with dignity. That his body be buried beside Pythias, his first wife. No monuments. No grand ceremony. Just a clean, thoughtful ending to a life devoted to understanding the world. Aristotle had lived for truth, not attention, and he wanted to leave the same way. In 322 BC, Aristotle died, about 62 years old, just a year after the death of Alexander. And yet, even in death, the world was not ready to remember him. Most of his works were lost almost immediately. His students tried to preserve them, but the political chaos of the time scattered his scrolls. For nearly 2 centuries, his teachings were hidden away, forgotten in dusty basements, secret libraries, and private collections. It wasn't until the Roman era, and later the Islamic Golden Age, that some of his works were rediscovered, translated, and breathed back into life. Had fate been just slightly different, the name Aristotle might have vanished from human memory forever. Some of his works survived through secret transmission, copied from teacher to student. But for most of the world, Aristotle was forgotten. Within decades, his name faded from public discourse. People stopped quoting him. His schools fell silent. Other philosophers rose with louder voices, new ideas, and the influence of shifting empires. Greece, once the cradle of thought, weakened. Rome, with its legions, ascended. Across the ancient world, the scrolls that carried Aristotle's ideas vanished into obscurity. Yet even in this silence, his impact endured quietly, like a seed buried deep in soil, waiting for centuries to bloom again. The ideas he had poured into fragile scrolls, ideas of logic, ethics, science, and reason, could not be destroyed entirely. They were too precise, too connected to the structure of thought itself, to ever vanish completely. The empire that once carried his influence might have fallen, but the mind of Aristotle remained immortal and waiting, ready to shape the future in ways he could never have imagined. The kings he had taught were dead. The school he had built lay silent. The fire of his mind seemed extinguished. For nearly 2 centuries, the world acted as though Aristotle had never existed. But the knowledge he had left behind was not gone, it was sleeping, hidden in a small village, in the dusty cellar of a forgotten scholar's home. Hundreds of fragile scrolls lay in silence, their ink faded, their language too difficult for most to comprehend, yet each one carried the spark of genius, the accumulated wisdom of a lifetime devoted to truth. Then, in the city of Skepsis in Asia Minor, a man named Apollycon, a wealthy book collector and lover of philosophy, heard whispers of these hidden scrolls. Compelled by curiosity and devotion to learning, he journeyed to the village, paying large sums for the treasures he sought. When he finally saw them with his own eyes, he was stunned. The lost works of Aristotle lay before him, hundreds of scrolls, damaged, dusty, scattered, but miraculously still intact. Apollycon may not have understood every word, but he knew these were extraordinary writings, a record of a mind that had shaped the world. He carefully packed the scrolls and brought them back to Athens, returning Aristotle, at least in spirit, to the city he had once called home. As the Roman Empire rose, it absorbed the culture, philosophy, and ideas of Greece. Roman leaders, scholars, and soldiers admired Greek thought, but they mostly followed Stoicism or Epicureanism. Aristotle's works, still fragile and difficult to read, were largely ignored, until one day, fortune intervened. A Roman general named Sulla raided Athens, capturing Apollycon's library. Among the treasures taken to Rome were the precious scrolls of Aristotle. There, in a city of scholars and political ambition, a young and brilliant thinker named Andronicus of Rhodes discovered them. Andronicus did more than just read the scrolls. He organized them, edited them, and categorized them. He gave Aristotle's scattered works a new structure, turning fragments into a coherent system. Logic, ethics, politics, science, metaphysics, all were arranged in a way that could be studied and taught. He created the Organon, Aristotle's systematic guide to logic. He preserved the Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle's vision of the good life. He compiled Aristotle's political theories, his study of art and drama in the Poetics, his reflections on being and reality in metaphysics, his study of the soul and de anima, and his countless observations of the natural world, laying the foundation for biology as a discipline. Through Andronicus, Aristotle's mind returned from obscurity. The works that had once been nearly lost to time were now accessible to scholars, ready to influence generations yet to come. The knowledge of a man who had taught kings, classified animals, measured the stars, and systematized the human mind was alive again. His ideas were no longer the property of a single teacher or student, they were immortal, set to shape the world for thousands of years. Aristotle's life, once nearly erased by time and chaos, was now resurrected through the dedication of those who recognized genius. What he had written in exile, in quiet desperation, in the shadow of mortality, had survived. And as the Roman Empire absorbed Greek thought, the scrolls of Aristotle spread across the known world, carrying the mind of a philosopher whose influence would never die. These were not just books. These scrolls and writings were the intellectual skeleton of human civilization, the framework upon which generations would build. And yet, they were almost lost forever. For centuries, the wisdom of Aristotle lay dormant, fragile, hidden in scrolls and manuscripts. Then, in the heart of the Islamic world, something extraordinary happened. In great cities like Baghdad, Cordoba, and Cairo, scholars began collecting, translating, and studying the ancient texts of Greece. They did not merely translate them word for word, they engaged with the ideas, debated them, questioned them, and expanded upon them. Aristotle became the most respected name in Islamic philosophy. Thinkers like Avicenna, Averroes, Al-Farabi, and Al-Kindi studied his logic, ethics, medicine, and natural philosophy. They called him the first teacher, recognizing his foundational role in the history of thought. Across the Islamic world, his writings became central to education, law, medicine, and science. Through these translations, Aristotle's ideas eventually flowed into medieval Europe. By the 12th and 13th centuries, Europe was emerging from the Dark Ages. Christian scholars, especially in universities such as Paris, Bologna, and Oxford, rediscovered Aristotle, first through Arabic translations, and later retransmitted into Latin. At first, the Church was wary. Aristotle was not Christian, he did not speak of scripture or divine revelation. But one theologian, Thomas Aquinas, saw something revolutionary. He realized that Aristotle's logic and philosophy could provide a rational framework for understanding theology. Faith and reason, he argued, were not enemies, they could be partners in understanding the divine. Through Aquinas, Aristotle became the foundation of European scholastic thought. For the next 6 centuries, students across Europe studied Aristotle. They learned to argue with logic, to live with ethics, to govern through politics, to explore nature with observation, and to probe the unseen with metaphysics. His ideas shaped the curriculum of the first modern universities in Bologna, Paris, Oxford, and Cambridge, influencing the way knowledge was organized, taught, and valued. Even the great scientists of the Renaissance, Galileo, Kepler, Newton, though sometimes disagreeing with Aristotle's conclusions, inherited his method, the insistence on careful observation, logical reasoning, classification, and understanding nature systematically. Modern logic, modern science, even computer science and artificial intelligence, all trace their roots back to the systems Aristotle created. His influence became so deep and pervasive that, over time, it became almost invisible. People forgot he was the architect, the mind behind the framework. Yet everywhere we think, reason, classify, or study, there is a shadow of Aristotle. The teacher who once walked the Lyceum, wrote on fragile scrolls in exile, and worried that all his work might vanish, he lives in every thought, every experiment, every question humanity asks about the world. Aristotle's mind, nearly lost to history, had become immortal. From dusty scrolls to global universities, from medieval philosophers to modern scientists, his ideas built the foundations of civilization itself, proving that while empires fall and lives end, true wisdom is timeless. He became the heir of Western thinking, invisible yet always present, shaping minds and civilizations long after he walked the Lyceum. Think about this: Aristotle lived before Jesus Christ, before the Roman Empire, before paper, before Islam, before electricity, before telescopes, before modern cities, before democracy, before the Internet, before artificial intelligence, even before you or me. And yet, more than 2,300 years later, we are still asking his questions, reading his ideas, studying his logic, debating his ethics, building systems on the foundations he created. Aristotle never raised an army. He never ruled a nation. He didn't own vast lands. He didn't command wealth. He died in exile, almost forgotten, and yet he won. Not through power, violence, or status, but through thought. He didn't conquer cities, he conquered ignorance. He didn't build empires of land, he built an empire of reason. And today, whether we realize it or not, we live in a world he helped construct. Every school, every system of government, every scientific method, every question about life and morality carries his fingerprints. This is Part 4, The Philosopher Who Became Time, Aristotle's final gift to the world. His name lives, his words live, his mind lives, his questions live, and through them, we live better. But how? How did a man nearly erased from history become the intellectual father of nearly everything we call modern? The answer is simple: Aristotle did not just teach students. He taught generations. His questions were so deep, so eternal, that every new generation found themselves staring at the same mysteries. What is a good life? What is truth? What is happiness? What is the soul? What is justice? How should society work? Why are we here? And this is why we still read him today. Aristotle never told people what to think. He taught them how to think. He didn't hand out answers, he gave humanity the tools to find answers for themselves. Logic, observation, reason, questioning, all the instruments of thought we take for granted today were gifts from Aristotle. That is why his teachings feel alive, relevant, and fresh, even in the modern world, even after thousands of years. So, what is the meaning of life? Aristotle's answer: everything has a purpose. Every object, every action, every being has a function, a reason for existence. Human beings are no different. He taught that the good life is a life of purpose, virtue, and reason. Happiness is not fleeting pleasure but the fulfillment of your potential, living in balance, cultivating character, and contributing to the world around you. He broke life down into practical wisdom, ethics, logic, politics, science, art, all tools to understand ourselves and the universe. He built a bridge from curiosity to knowledge, from observation to truth, from questions to understanding. And so, more than 2 millennia after a boy from Stagira first asked, "Why does a bird fly? Why does the sun rise? What is truth?" Aristotle's mind still whispers to us. His final gift is not a book, a school, or a theory, it is the courage to think, the power to question, and the responsibility to seek truth. Aristotle's life teaches us that even if the world forgets you, ideas can outlive empires, kings, and centuries. The true immortality is in thought, reason, and the questions we leave behind. And today, as we read, study, and wonder, we carry Aristotle's legacy forward, still learning from the philosopher who taught the world how to think. The purpose of a knife is to cut. The purpose of a seed is to grow into a tree. And the purpose of human life, Aristotle taught, is to become the best version of yourself. Life is not about wealth, fame, or power. It is about fulfilling your potential, living a life of meaning, balance, and excellence. In Greek, he called this eudaimonia, a word far deeper than happiness. It is a life that is full, meaningful, honest, and excellent, where your mind, heart, and actions all align. What is real happiness? Aristotle said it does not come from fleeting pleasure or the pursuit of money. True happiness comes from virtue, being brave, kind, wise, disciplined, and fair. But virtue is not something you are born with. You must practice it every day. Just as muscles grow through repeated exercise, your character grows through repeated good actions. You become brave by acting bravely, generous by acting generously, honest by telling the truth again and again. What makes someone great? Aristotle rejected the idea that greatness comes from birth, family, or luck. You are what you repeatedly do, he said. If you lie every day, you become a liar. If you speak the truth every day, you become honest. If you study every day, you become wise. Your habits shape your character, and your character shapes your life. Greatness is not luck, it is repetition, discipline, and purpose. How should we live? Aristotle believed in the golden mean, the balance between extremes. Not too cowardly, not reckless. Not lazy, not obsessive. Not rude, not silent. Courage, honesty, and moderation are the key. A good life is one lived in balance, where reason guides action, and peace comes naturally. What is the soul? For Aristotle, the soul is not a ghost, nor a mysterious spirit floating inside you. The soul is your form, your actions, your choices, the living expression of your potential. A strong soul is built through virtue, action, and purpose. A weak soul grows from lies, indulgence, and neglect. It is what you do with your life that defines you. What is the role of government? Aristotle believed society should help people become their best selves. Total freedom or total control are both wrong. Justice comes when citizens and leaders follow reason. Politics, for him, was not about power, it was about education, fairness, duty, and growth. A good government cultivates virtue in its people, not obedience, not fear. What makes us truly human? Aristotle said it is our logic, language, memory, and purpose. Humans are not just animals, they are capable of understanding, reasoning, and creating meaning. Through our choices, we define ourselves, shape our communities, and leave a legacy of thought and action. Aristotle's teachings are not ancient relics. They are a manual for life, a blueprint for thinking, acting, and living with purpose. Every decision we make, every habit we form, every society we build echoes his questions: how should we live? What is virtue? What is the purpose of life? Through these ideas, the boy from Stagira, who once stared at the stars and asked why the sun rises, continues to guide the world, 2,300 years after his birth. We are the only creatures who ask, what is right? What is wrong? What is my role in this world? That is what made Aristotle special. He never stopped asking those questions, and he never stopped helping others ask them too. Why should his story be told today, loudly, proudly, endlessly? Because we live in a world full of noise, addicted to attention, obsessed with opinions, always in a hurry, forgetting the past, and glorifying fame over wisdom. In that world, Aristotle is a lighthouse. He reminds us that quiet thinking is powerful, that truth requires patience, growth takes time, knowledge matters, discipline is freedom, and greatness is not inherited, it is earned through action. He shows us that even if the world forgets you, if your work is honest, your words are clear, and your intent is pure, you will live forever in the minds of those who continue to think and learn. And this story isn't just about a philosopher, it's about you. Every sentence here helps you listen to real, beautiful English. It teaches you powerful ideas in simple words. It shows you how to think and speak better. It motivates you, builds your fluency, helps you practice patience, and demonstrates the power of speaking slowly, clearly, and deeply. Aristotle never spoke English. But the best way to learn English is through real stories about real people with real meaning. If you understood this story today, congratulations, you are already growing. Over 2,300 years ago, a boy sat under the stars and asked, why does the world exist? What is my purpose? How can I live well? And how can I help others do the same? That boy was Aristotle. He never imagined the internet, airplanes, skyscrapers, microphones, satellites, or smartphones. He lived in a world of scrolls, sandals, sun, war, silence, and exile. And yet, he shaped the entire way we think today. His body turned to dust, but his mind became time-proof. This is not just the end of a story. It is the beginning of a mindset. Ask more questions. Think deeper. Practice virtue. Become better each day. Learn something new every moment. Live with reason, love, balance, and purpose. That is the real legacy of a man who was once nearly forgotten, but now teaches the whole world again, including you. Now it's your turn. Read. Listen. Learn. Question. Grow. Speak. Change. Inspire. Thank you for watching this story. This video was not just made to teach English, it was made to teach you how to think, how to grow, and how to become someone the world never forgets. And if this story touched you, if you learned something new today, if you felt something powerful in your heart, do one thing right now: subscribe to the channel. We are just getting started, and the next story might change your life even more than this one did. I'll see you in the next video. Until then, keep learning, keep growing, and never stop thinking.